Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for showing up and being the dedicated early risers. I hope you've all had your tea and coffee and are ready for another day of interesting panels. I'm very honored today to be able to speak about human rights and climate change and its effect in Iraq. I've got a wonderful panel with me comprising members of civil society, government, experts that are going to share their expertise with you. Often when we think about climate change, we think about it as an issue in and of itself. And I've had actually a couple of people ask me what are the links between human rights and climate change. But the thing is that climate change affects a wide range of rights, everything from the right to water, the right to health, to housing, security and stability. So hopefully the panelists today are going to walk us through what some of the impacts we're seeing already are in Iraq related to climate change. And I will try to have us take a more positive tone as we conclude with solutions and things that we can do looking forward. So first up, I'm going to introduce Mr. Jasim al-Asadi, who is the founder and head of Nature Iraq, a wonderful organization that has been very active, especially in the southern marshes. The southern marshes have seen quite dramatic impacts of both climate change and environmental degradation. Could you maybe start by walking us through some of the impacts that you've been seeing in the southern marshes and how that's affecting people's lives there?
Yeah, as you know, through the pictures, the marsh. Now they are alive and they are rebuilded. The numbers are more than 62,000 people. They live on fishery as well as other jobs who are related to the climate and environment of those places. In 2022, 2,000 people were still living, but now the population is 61,000 people. After the people went back to those places, the water level of Ifrits and Tigers once again increased, but still there's a lot of issues in those places. After 2003, the center marshes with land center opened, and in 2025 they outlined a plan to, and they divided the places into three places to Huwaiza, West Sanbar, and the neighboring region of Iran. But if you look at this system, hydrology system, and the divide of water system in those places, until 2025, we see we have not achieved any considerable results. But after the increase of water level in all three dams increased by 5 million liters, and Tharthar Lake, 90% of marshes, water increased in level, increased in those marshes. After that, after the water level increased, once again, a drought happened. The policies of former regime caused this drought, but after 2015, and once again, drought happened in 2018 as well, which decreased water level. But was a big drought. It affected the region a lot. 30% of natural resources lost. 90% of fishery sources were lost. I want to tell you another point is that even though the marshes became plays in UNICEF, but all those animals and there's a risk of extinction and for those animals, as well as the rocks and all the different birds. Uh, uh, and the kind of animal, some of them are unique animals. But now there's a risk of those animals and birds being lost again, once again. So there's a big threat of this marsh and the people and the environment of them. Life on the marshes is under big threat, especially in the water type and water level, increase of the level. Uh, and the salt level is increasing by a lot margin. Uh, and when the water level decreases, we see a big crisis or big problem for those marshes. You see those animals who live on the outskirts of the marshes, uh, they move around the places. As you know, there's another refugee flow from those marshes to other places in southern Iraq, like Kurd, Babylon, Najaf, any places there's water and there's agriculture opportunities, as well as other work. But as you know, now the marsh has lost a lot of resources and a lot of human resources, and this has there's a big risk now today in the marsh. We cannot say it's a drought completely, but better than last year. But because of the decrease of water level, for example, 2019, if our Ifrat River and the Jubaish region, which is known, the water flows from there to other marshes. In 2023, the water level became just decreased to 28 centimeter. That's the least water level of Euphrates in the history of that river. And now it's 90 centimeters. It's not high, but as I say, it's not like last year. Now we see a climate change threat as well. Every year we lose 1.8 meters of water level. Another thing for the marshes, in 2015 when we planned to save the marshes, we planned those plan. We saw like uh, uh, 5.4 billion water needed. And this so we can save the marsh and protect the environment. And we can use other sources like other water resources to keep the water level and protect the environment of Mamash, especially from the lakes and river around in the southern Iraq region as well as the middle of Iraq. Like Amara and Sheikh Gharaf region. But in the last 20 years, what we have done, we have not been able to benefit from the water sources we have. And add to that, there's a lot of pollution around the lakes and the river and the water resources from. And these pollutions go straight into those marshes, which because it comes from the water flow as well as from the flood. I know, and I am not able to clean up the river through filters to flow into the marshes. So you have a clean water. Maybe the Egyptian example or Egyptian model of Zambala River, who benefited from cleaning the water. Um, and they use those water, they filtered and they use it for agriculture.
Thank you very much for that. It was a very clear picture of what we're seeing. And, you know, clearly the water issue is something that's having a lot of effects in the south. With that, I would like to turn to our second panelist, who is a lawyer and an expert in water issues and mediation, particularly. Dr. Shubber, could you maybe walk us through what the future of water availability and scarcity look like in Iraq? What are some of the implications of increased water scarcity in Iraq, particularly vis-a-vis its relations with its neighbors and the effects that will have on human rights?
Thank you for having me on this distinguished panel. And I also want to thank our first panelist, Jasim, because he's illustrated already many of the points I'm going to make. But I want to start with two short observations about the connection between water and climate change. First, I want to make a connection with the title of this event, because what climate change does is to introduce uncertainty in relation to water availability. It's disrupting an already complicated issue when it comes to water resources management. As many of you know, it's already considered a wicked problem, a problem that is very difficult to solve, if not impossible. And climate change is adding much disruption, my second point. And I think that disruption is both a challenge, but also an opportunity to think about how we use water. It's when we're faced with a crisis that we realize our dependency on it. We use water not just for drinking, but for food production, for energy production, for industrial purposes. The mobile phones that all of you have necessitated the use of water for their production. The clothes we wear, everything, in fact, uses water in some way or the other. Our challenge already today is that we don't always have enough water to satisfy those needs, to satisfy the way in which water is consumed to produce what I've mentioned. So we already see competition between users at all levels, from communal to national to international. If we turn now to the effects of climate change here in Iraq, I want to highlight two key factors. Coming back to the notion of uncertainty, it's the unpredictability of water availability. Climate change no longer allows us to model and forecast how much water is going to be available. We have erratic precipitation patterns, so rainfall comes at different times, in different quantities, in different places, and the same applies to snowfall. And we have temperature increase as well, which is affecting the region, which is affecting the entire globe. We read on a daily basis about glaciers melting in Asia, in Europe, and so forth. And together, these two factors have three effects. They decrease river discharge, so there's less water available in the rivers, in the Tigris and the Euphrates. They cause extreme weather events, so ranging from prolonged droughts, as have been experienced already in the region, to extreme floods, Very heavy rainfalls, storms, are another expression of those two factors. And then finally, sea level rise as well, which has an impact in the south of the country, increasing salinity in the water, damaging as well the quality of the land. And if we look at these three effects, we can think of the impact that they're having on water availability. A resource that is already scarce becomes even more scarce. Less water is accessible for the different users that I've just highlighted. And that affects not just water for domestic purposes, but water for agriculture. As we know, on average, agriculture consumes about 70% of all water worldwide. I think the percentage here is slightly higher. And when there is less water available, whether it's because of decreased rainfall, which is affecting the northern provinces where agriculture relies on rainfall, or the provinces where agriculture relies on irrigation, this is affecting livelihoods, the livelihoods of the farmers. It's affecting food production. It's affecting food security as well. And of course, it has an immense impact on the environment. The environment, we forget that it's one of the major users of water as well. Jasim has already illustrated how it's affecting the marshes. We see, in addition to the impact on the livelihoods of the communities that live there, that rely on fishing, that rely on agriculture, we see environmental degradation, we see biodiversity being affected. So another human right here, the right to a healthy environment, is impacted. What are the implications of all of these effects? Well, in the first instance, we see that when it comes to water resources management, which is already complicated, it's even more complicated than it was. Planning becomes challenging because we plan for a certain amount of water to be available, but we don't know if it's going to be there. So at some point in time, if the conditions change, there is a need to adjust and to change the initial plan. And that has an impact domestically, obviously, but it's also an international matter. When water is coming from other regions, from other countries, into a third country, in the way that the Tigris and the Euphrates flow from Turkey through Syria into Iraq, these effects are being felt in those other countries. They're also taking measures to address them. And in the absence of coordination, there are question marks as how you can deal with the situation in each of the countries. What it does also, when there is less water available, is that it forces us to prioritize. Who is going to get the water? Of course, water for drinking, for humans, is a priority. We've already heard about the human right to water. That comes top. But after that, how much water for the marshes? How much water for agriculture? How much water for other purposes that we don't see immediately, but are also there? These are difficult and sensitive questions to be asked. In the case of a prolonged drought, those who have lost their livelihoods because they don't have access to water, how do we support them? What alternatives can we bring? It's a lot of questions. I don't have all the answers, but these are really important questions, and I'll end here with two challenges, but also an opportunity. I think uncertainty is certainly an immense challenge because of the impacts on water availability that I've just outlined. It's also a challenge because of the international dimension. Everything that I explained is affecting the countries in the region, the riparians of the two rivers and of the other rivers in the region and globally. We see that other parts of the world are being affected at the moment. You may or may not know that Switzerland and France are negotiating over the Rhone River that they share. There is no agreement at the moment, and France wants assurances about how much water it's going to get from Switzerland for agricultural production and in order to operate the nuclear power plants that are downstream of Lake Geneva. So this is an international matter, a matter of concern. But at the same time, I would want to hope that it's an opportunity to think about how we use water individually, as a community, nationally and internationally. Because the unpredictability that I highlighted, we have no control over it. And so all of us will be affected in different ways, but affected by something that we can't control. And this is an opportunity to come together and to do something. And my final point is something I was explaining to someone yesterday. When we talk about water, everyone will say how important it is, how we need to value it, how we need to respect it. But when it comes to taking action, it's often more complicated. When it comes to putting money into projects, into the measures that we need to address uncertainty and all the other issues that affect water, because it's a factor that comes amongst many other factors that are already affecting water, and uncertainty also affects the demand for water, not just the supply of water. But we have to go beyond talking about it. We have to go beyond saying that we'll do something and actually do something and put the financing that's needed. And I'll end here.
Thank you. I think you raised some very interesting issues and concerns, and I look forward to hearing from Dr. Mufti a little while later about how the government is thinking about these concerns. Before I turn to you, Dr. Mufti, I would just like to ask our panelist at the end, Ms. Sherri Kraham Talabany. So far we've gotten a good overview of some of the issues and the ways that they're impacting people. But we also know that climate change already is and is expected to disproportionately impact certain groups, particularly those in society who are already among the most vulnerable, like women and girls. Could you maybe speak to some of the specific effects that climate change is having on women and girls in Iraq and how they're feeling and experiencing climate change so far?
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me? Is it working? As you said, we've already seen profound and very specific impacts to women and girls because it's exacerbating existing inequalities, creating new challenges, and we see that both the vulnerabilities and the impacts are both intersecting and compounding their building. So I'll talk about the 5 ways that we see most prominently impacting women and girls. First, women and girls are at greater risk of harm during disasters. Women and girls are 14 times more likely to be harmed during an environmental disaster. At least 60% of deaths in an environmentally related extreme climate event are women. In countries like Iraq, women and girls already have a lower capacity to cope with such events, less access to the resources they need to respond, insufficient access to information and early warnings. So women are heavily impacted in disasters. Second, we see that women and girls have increased vulnerability to displacement and increased impacts while in displacement. So when we heard about the environmental degradation, such as the extreme temperatures and water scarcity, it's led to displacement in areas like southern Iraq, as Mr. Jasim said. Displaced populations are generally already disproportionately impacted by storms, by flooding, by drought, and women and girls face heightened risks of, while in displacement, less access to livelihoods, increased exposure to violence. That's the third area, which is what we see in climate-related events and displacement. We see heightened risk of gender-based violence. So these climate-induced stressors, which can also be economic, displacement, water scarcity, have been directly linked already to a rise in violence against women and girls. And in some context, families, especially here in Iraq, resort to negative coping mechanisms such as early marriage, forced marriage. And these are used to address the economic disparities, the economic tensions that are exacerbated by climate change. Fourth, there are huge barriers to accessing sexual and reproductive health services. So climate-related events already disrupt healthcare infrastructure for everybody. And this can limit access to services for women and girls, which impacts increased rates of maternal mortality, infant mortality, unintended pregnancies, and untreated reproductive health issues. Finally, this exacerbates the inequality of the economic situation. So we already heard about how this impacts agriculture and water scarcity, water resources. Women often rely on these sectors, experience greater economic hardship. The financial strain also impacts their access to education and healthcare and other critical services. So women in Iraq, or girls in Iraq, we only see 5 out of 10 women graduating from secondary education. So this dynamic is exacerbated by all of these other factors, these social inequities and economic inequities. And so they also translate into women having fewer assets, which allow them to deal with the negative impacts of climate. So I'll close by telling you a story about our client Fadia. So Fadia was a Yazidi woman in Sinjar who was with a group of other women in her family doing household chores when ISIS came. Her husband was with the men of the family and had the family car, and he and the men were able to escape and come to Kurdistan. But the women were taken as captives, and she was exposed to brutal sexual and other forms of torture, sexual violence. When Fadia was rescued, years later, she returned to her family in a displacement camp for Yazidi survivors here in Kurdistan. She struggled with providing for her children access to water, access to food, access to livelihoods, or any education to finish her education. Unfortunately, Fadia had no influence over the decisions of her family and argued with her husband a lot about leaving the displacement camp to return to Sinjar. She was exposed to numerous floods and fires in the camp. Her children, her daughter, was exposed to waterborne diseases because of the constant exposure to the water inside their tent. And so this is the situation that Fadia remains in today in a displacement camp in Kurdistan, Iraq, exposed to a range of challenges: lack of access to healthcare resources, lack of access to work and jobs, and having a very low impact on the ability to make decisions about her future and to mitigate the consequences of her displacement. So I think what we see here in Iraq, as in other places that are affected by climate, that these impacts disproportionately impact women and girls, particularly in rural and conflict-affected areas where they face food insecurity, water scarcity, displacement, violence, and a lack of access to both services and protection.
Thank you. And I want to thank you again, especially for sharing that human story with us. I think it's really important to remember, especially in forums like this, where we often talk at very high levels, that these are lived things that have very real impacts on people's lives. Of course, so Sherri, you are the co-founder and the head of the SEED organization. So you, like myself, as members of the NGO world, are painfully aware that changes that are happening in funding, particularly with the cutting of USAID and other states reducing their foreign assistance budgets, has meant that the money for these kinds of activities has been rapidly shrinking. Do you have any sorts of recommendations or advice to either policymakers or organizations seeking to do programming around climate to ensure that they're taking into account the specific needs of women and girls?
Sure, of course. Thank you. So I believe that women need to be in the places where decisions are made, because women are greatly impacted by these climate-related disasters, and women are best inclined to be able to represent the needs of families and communities. And we know that when women participate in policy making or decision making, whether it's in the home or it's in the parliament or it's in government, that the outcomes are better for all of society, not just for women and girls. So it's really important for, especially in this resource-constrained time where governments are pulling back, that we continue to focus on how to empower women to be capacitated to contribute to decision-making, contribute to policy-making, that women's voices are part of the process, and that we consult with women about these impacts and how to mitigate these impacts. And we can also support local mechanisms. So here in the Kurdistan region, we have this GBV sector coordination group, which SEED co-leads as a local coordinating mechanism. Here with MOLSA, the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, we coordinate among 80 government agents, 80 organizations and government agencies that are all focused on the protection of women and girls. And these are the kinds of mechanisms that need to be fostered and supported so that we can continue to do our work to ensure that women's needs and girls' needs are addressed here in Kurdistan. So I think it's critically important, as international donors are pulling away, that we together identify this priority to support local mechanisms, to support local decision-making, local services, locally led coordination. And I think there's never been a more critical moment to focus on the long-term investments in Kurdistan's capacity to manage these climate-related impacts.
Thank you. I think you're totally right. And I think that provides a perfect segue to Dr. Torhan, who is the advisor to the Prime Minister on Water Affairs. He has a very rich background and a lot of expertise that he's able to bring both to us and also to the Iraqi government. Could you maybe walk us through some of the steps that the government has been taking to address the issues, particularly of water, since that's your expertise, but other climate issues? And I would especially like, in light of Sherri's intervention, I'd especially like to hear any efforts that the government has taken to ensure that the needs of women and girls are thought of and included in this programming.
Thank you. Before I talk about what we are doing in order to be face-to-face with the water situation, I will talk about some answering about what our colleagues said. Do you know, the water budget in Iraq, if we have good season, that means we will need about 90 billion cubic meter per year. In drought or in poor season, we will have about 50 billion. So always Iraq used to be between this range year after year. But what happened in Iraq start now, it's not isolated from our region or from the world for the climate change. There is now climate change. We record some changes about that. For example, we used to have about, let me say, about 15 years ago, 1 year rainfall with good rainfall, 1 year in poor rainfall. After that, it started to be 1 for 2, 1 for 3. This year we have 1 for 4. That's mean 1 year rainy and 4 year almost poor in rainfall or close to be drought. By this kind of case or modeling, that's mean we still not in drought period, we are in poor period, but we are just a step before to go in the drought period. The other thing about Iraq, our water budget or our water supply, about 75% it's used to come to Iraq from our neighborhood. And by this mean, about just 20 to 25% we have inside in Iraq. I am talking about surface water, not about undersurface. The main problem of Iraq in the water supply, because as I said, about 75% it used to come out of Iraq, there is no agreement for Iraq and his neighborhood. There is kind memorandum of understanding, MOU, there is kind another understanding, but there is no fixed agreement. Our neighborhood, they believe they are upstream and we are downstream. They don't believe or agree we are riparian countries or we are coastal countries. And in this kind of situation, there is different in definition about what we have of the water. If we are riparian countries or coastal countries, that means Iraq has right to say, okay, I need just in this and this amount of percentage. But when we are downstream and our neighborhood, they are upstream, that means they can use and they can take what they want and the rest of they don't want it, they can push it in Iraq. And this, it is not new, it's from century. It's just, we start this kind of conversation with our neighborhood from 14th, just before 8 years ago. And the other point happened because of we are, there is not this kind of understanding. If we back for 70 years ago, the percentage between the people or the citizens who live in the cities and the people who used to live in the village, it was about 1 to 3 used to the city and 2 of the 3 used to village. According to the last statistical national census before a few months ago, it's start completely to be upside down now. We have about almost 70% from our citizens living or trying to live in the cities and the big cities, and the other still live in the village. That will create for the government or even for the next government kind of social conflict to find job opportunity, to find the good services for these big cities. In this kind of atmosphere, what we start to do, and because of there is, as I told before, there is no clear or fixed agreement between Iraq and his neighborhood, we start try to think something, let me say, out of the box. So now we have a kind of MOU with Turkey especially because our 70% of water supply come to Iraq from Turkey. Kind of MOU, it's, let me say, it's water supply / economic. By this kind of MOU, we start dealing with this issue and it is successful. We start that just before almost less than 1 year, and now what we have or what we get now from water supply is almost more than double what we had in 23. In 24, for example, from what we came by river, the Tigris River, it is double after we start working in this kind of MOU. Maybe we were thinking to make the same MOU with the other neighborhood, for example, with Iran, although with Iran, it's about 13% from water supply coming from Iran. But this kind of MOU, it's really successful for Iraq, but that doesn't mean we have no needs for the water supply. One of the points that my colleague talked is about the marshes. The marshes taking about 10 to 15% for the water reserves of surface water reserve of Iraq, and we have evaporation percentage from 6 to 8 billion cubic meter per year. It's a huge number. That's mean almost about the dam of Haditha All that lake could be evaporated if we're talking about the whole of the Iraq. And that's because Iraq is one of the 50, most of the 15 countries suffered with the climate change. By this kind of atmosphere we're dealing now, we brought to Iraq, and we encourage the farmers to use a new kind or new technology for agriculture, even for rice, because rice taking a huge amount of water. And we start to what we called it in Arabic, hasidat al-miyah, water hunts, small dams in order to reserve the water in desert area and in some other areas. And again, with this kind of MOU, we're keeping our water need in safe until now. But what we need in Iraq, really, we need to create kind of culture to how to use this kind of water. It is not, again, it's not just isolated by Iraq. The whole world has climate change now. So we should start new kind of agriculture and new kind of culture to each people, to each citizen in Iraq, how to use and how to know how much this water is variable, and it is big value for Iraq. The last point what I want to say, when we're talking about the treatment and retreatment of water, and for the leaching water especially, because it's about 10 to 15% for the water supply is used to going to the domestical using. So we have about 80 to 85% for the agriculture use. One of the output of the agriculture use is the leaching water, and what we call it in Arabic, miyah al-bazl. This amount of water, if we treat it or retreat it, that doesn't mean we will have value add in our water supply, because already this leaching water inside the budget of the water budget. So we will change the quality of the water. We will not add another value or another amount for the water if we calculate the leaching water. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a few minutes left, so I'd just like to reiterate my question. If there's anything that you're particularly proud of that the government has done, and any ways that the government is taking into account the specific needs of women and girls when designing water policies.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, one of the good points that we did it is that we signed the MOU with Turkey, and I said it is, let me say, it's about water supply / economic, and it's going well. What now, if we make comparison between what we have in our dams and make comparison from the past year, it is very good. It's about double. It's not enough, but it is double. So it is good. And we start encourage the farmers to use new technology for agriculture. And again, I will repeat, we need to create culture for each citizen, how this water is variable, how it's big value for each one. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. With that, we are just about out of time. I hope you join me in thanking our very expert panelists, and I hope you all learned something, as I know I did. Thank you very much. I was told no questions.
Translation is good, especially in Arabic. I have a few questions, Mr. Torhan Mufti, and I have a note for Ms. Talabany. Mr. Torhan, I was expecting to have better things to say. I'll tell you, in Iraq, there's no progressive water policy in Iraq. You talk with their pride. Understand with Turkey, understand member agreement. There's no memorandum of understanding. Iraq has given up to Iranian policy strategies. There's a very closeness between Iran and Iraq, but with Turkey as well. But Iraqi state, what the Iraqi state did against KRG, given the economic crisis, you see 55 small ponds has been built in Kurdistan region. I tell you, I ask you, what Iraq has done for this and for the dam, to build dams like Haditha and Sarsa. Now they go become all those dam and ponds from the kingdom era. Only Saddam Dam, now it's known Mosul Dam, but it has a lot of issues. But in truth, your Iraqi government, why is very doesn't care a lot about water policy. Regarding the human rights, which link to the water crisis, it's not for one people, but to tell people in southern Iraqi villages to rebuild those villages. If you don't build schools in the village and don't give them social benefits, they cannot stay in the village. They will flee to the city. That's the criticism toward you, because you are an advisor to Iraqi Prime Minister. Because I feel that Iraqi government doesn't have a specific water policy, and could you too? Thank you very much. You don't have a lot of time. من دم عربي والله مبدمه سباستكم. The subject is or the issue is not about giving up on or giving to the Iraqi or Turkish policy. Before the neighboring countries had a lot of benefits from Iraqi state, especially in economic issues. That's not true. What we've done is we have used economic power to get more water. We have 25% of water resources inside Iraq. 75% are outside, and that's not easy for Iraq, because we don't have any agreement with other countries, with the neighboring countries. I'm talking about the last 100 years. We don't have any agreements. Tomorrow, the idea is not about dams. Those dams we have, it's enough. We have lakes, Habbania, and the marsh. We have, I estimate, 170 billion water liter. What we need in Iraq is to protect the resources. The people who flee their places in Iraq, it occurs in all Iraq, in Kurdistan region. That doesn't say the services are bad, but it's looking for new opportunities, for job opportunities. If you don't have agriculture opportunities for those people and those villagers, they will go to another places. It doesn't mean there's those villages that don't have service. They are looking for job opportunities or work. But the economic aspect, using economic power, is the best policy to get more water. Look at the President Trump. He uses economic file against any country, and in his plan uses economic power to get what it wants. That's, I think, it's the best policy. Iraq can use the same against Turkey and Iran. Iraq has been used in the past. Iraq should use the same.